you. All right, how's everybody feeling tonight? Good, awesome. Well, I'm just gonna preface this with I'm gonna require your attention for the next hour. So thank you guys so much for being alert. I hope you ask questions at the end. I'm Sabrina Sanchez. I'm senior creativity reporter at Ad Age, and today we're gonna be talking about building your brand through the 3 C's: creativity, culture, and community. We're gonna talk a little bit about how brands are connecting with culture, building and nurturing communities, how to create emotional resonance with the resurgence of creativity, and the ingredients to creating a talkable brand story. So I have a wonderful panel here with me today, and you're going to hear a lot from them.
I'm Maryam, Banikarim, and I was a CMO for about 20 years across media, hospitality, and tech. And most recently, I've turned to building community. So I will pass to Sophia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sofia Hernandez. I lead global marketing, business marketing at TikTok, and commercial partnerships. And I'm really honored to sit here with all of these amazing women. I guarantee you that Sabrina will have to shut us up because we are big talkers, and we're excited to have this conversation with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Soyoung Kang. I am the CMO at EOS Products. I've been there for 6.5 years, which I think in CMO years is like 100 years or something like that, and just really honored to be here tonight.
Hi everyone, I'm Shaina. I'm formerly the co-founder and CMO at Juve, which is a Gen Z marketing company, and as of March of 2024, we're known as UTA Next Gen here at UTA Marketing. So shout out to the events team and everyone who's made this happen, and all the folks in the office. Excited to be here in our new home.
All right, thank you guys, and thank you to the AMA for putting on this fantastic panel. So I'm just gonna jump right in, and the first question is for Soyoung. We're living in the age of AI and creativity, technology, and so there's this blending of worlds happening right now. I'm curious to get your thoughts from the EOS brand perspective, how the definition of creativity has evolved in the age of AI, and how EOS is embracing this evolution.
Oh, you don't start slow, do you?
No.
Just jump right in.
There's a lot to get through.
So I wish that I had some sort of a brilliant response around that would illuminate how to best leverage AI and creativity. I really don't. I think the only thing that we can all do as marketers and people who are used to environments that are changing all the time is try new things, come at it in different ways. And for us, I think what that means is that we're trying, and based on what I've experienced and what our team has experienced so far, the tools that are widely available to us, especially as a smaller company, are largely supporting tools. They are not doing the heavy lifting of brilliant creative for us yet, and I think yet is the operative word because you never say never. But I really do believe that creativity still in the future, no matter how far advanced it gets, is always going to be in the domain of humans. And I say that because AI, as good as it is, will only tell you what has been because it's trained on history. And I think that when you think about what creativity is about imagining the thing that has never been or doing the thing that has never existed before. So I really, maybe it's just optimistic or, maybe I'm naive about it, but I really think that creativity is for humans.
Yeah, this is exactly why I started with this question, right? Because part of what we're talking about today is that, creativity, community is necessary for creativity. And obviously with tech, we're trying to reconcile the really technical, of course, and obviously the very human. And so, I wanted to ask Shaina, why are culture, creativity, and community so vital for engaging younger audiences? How does UTA help brands harness these elements, and how do you think about it in the context of AI?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we talked about with Gen Z is how Gen Z has fundamentally broken the marketing funnel. The traditional way that we've thought about business was that you have some level of awareness or stimuli that a brand shows you, and once a person or a consumer is engaged with that, the obvious impetus is that eventually they'll buy the product. But Gen Z's fundamentally really blurred those lines of where we get inspiration from and where do we actually lean into finding our actual consumer touch point. And it's like a loop, right? It's a combination of loyalty, it's a combination of word of mouth and inspiration that we get online. And we at NextGen have talked a lot about how the shift in culture has been to a community-first mindset, to what you were talking about, that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, a lot of brands were thinking about their consumer and understanding who it was in a consumer-first mindset. 5 years ago, we saw a creator-first mindset to actually listen and hear from real people, whether they were in your day-to-day life or macro influencers or celebrities, about what was happening in culture and what kind of products you could react to. And now the future is actually co-creating and building with brands the campaigns that you want to see in the world. And when brands are able to react to what creators are organic, or people, really, consumers are saying in real time, that's where we get to see the organic buzz, press, conversation around it. And I think even with the work that we've gotten to do with folks like Soyoung, like the brands that are able to change at the pace of culture and not be afraid of the risk or lead time in terms of their campaigns end up resonating the most organically with Gen Z. And I think the conversation around AI is, how do companies and brands leverage the tools they have access to actually create affinity and upscale the work that their employees do? We talk a lot about this with content. If you're a brand that's looking to hire a content creator, turn to your employees. The best people to talk about the work that you're doing or the product that you're trying to sell are the people in your office that are touching and testing with you the products that you're trying to reach with consumers. So to me, AI just becomes another tool in the arsenal of how do we elevate, how do we understand, and make some of those mundane and menial tasks a lot easier. But it's no way a replacement, but the brands that and companies that are able to use as a tool to leverage the success of their employees are gonna see all of their productivity streamlined a lot better. But I think fixating on just what the hyper-sensationalization of AI is takes away from the conversation of community and real people. And that's a lot of like where I find my critique of new technology. It's like there's real stories to tell about real people. Is the metaverse really a great solve to telling human stories when we have real people that we want to actually have conversations about?
Yeah, wow, what a throwback, metaverse. So, Sophia, a lot of this is, as Shaina mentioned, brands collaborating with creators, and a lot of that collaboration happens on places like TikTok. And we know that they're very passionate about TikTok, as we saw, from when TikTok went dark for a couple of hours last week. So I'm curious, how does TikTok empower brands to incorporate creativity, culture, and community into their marketing strategies? And do you have any examples of ways that you've worked with brands to build some of these, moments around community?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to double down on what my two friends here said. We are at a time of massive transformation for marketers and for brands. And what's the most hard for marketers is being vulnerable and really putting themselves out there and trusting their employees and trusting creators, because personalization was a thing of the past, right? Like that's how they connected with communities. They're like, well, let me put Sophia's name on this product. And now it's much deeper than that. And the reality is what communities expect of brands to actually love them, right? Like people don't love brands, they love people. And so there's this big expectation on brands to behave more like people. And that's really, really scary for brands. It's scary for their legal teams. It's scary for their comms teams. It's scary for their CEOs and their CFOs. At the same time, every CMO at every conference I go to is complaining about how much pressure they have to deliver ROI and prove out an ROI story. So how do you join the pressure of ROI with the pressure of actually being a human being as a brand? And so I think what TikTok has done is we put out a tool that empowered the everyday person to be creative. It empowered 7 million businesses who reside on the platform to have an outlet to new consumers, right? Like it gave people a way to express themselves. And that's also a threat to brands because brands don't really like to express themselves. We've built these very, very robust brand guideline books that our legal teams have signed off on, that we spend a lot of money, Brian, building, look, tone, and feel, et cetera. And we feel safe playing within that. And every single brand is being challenged now to step outside of that. And that's where we are today. And that's where I feel like products like the new innovative products like AI or whatever, creators, new partners are really challenging brands and providing them tools to show up more like a human being and less like a brand.
Thank you. Yeah, and Maryam, what are your thoughts on that? What does authentic storytelling look like to you? We were talking a little bit about this right before of how brands can show up and kind of just appeal to this audience in this way.
So it's interesting. I was interested to hear everybody's comments. So like I said, I was a CMO of big companies for a very long time. But this last few years, as I've turned to do some sort of different kind of work, I've actually learned to let go. And that's kind of an interesting concept as you were describing it. So 3 years ago, I started an event in my neighborhood. I live in Chelsea. I started an event that Shaina's been to. It's called The Longest Table, where we invite neighbors to come and bring friends and food. So it was a very simple premise. And I felt like I was back in college. I literally was flyering my neighborhood. And the premise was, we'll bring the tables and chairs, you bring friends and food. So as the global CMO of Hyatt Hotels or at NBC or next door, I was very much in a control situation, right? I was in a control mode with lots of legal hoops and things to go through. But all of a sudden, I'm doing an event in the neighborhood where it's completely volunteer driven. And it's really about grassroots and participation. So each year, and now we've been doing this event for 3 years, this year we had 1,000 people. So it's completely volunteer driven, right? So we put out the call, people show up on a Zoom call 6 weeks before, they want to volunteer. I don't always know them, right? So they show up and they say, oh, I'm gonna raise my hand to manage the volunteers. And I say to my husband, who's been roped into this process, I don't know them. And then we say, oh, grace and trust. Okay, you can be in charge. And they may not do it how I do it, but that's totally okay. And it's such an interesting learning. So the thing that's been amazing about this event is that from the get-go, we created a toolkit so anybody could replicate it. We weren't trying to hold on to the IP or make money off of it. It was simply to connect people to each other. So we had 500 people the first year, 700 the second year, and 1,000. We're limited by the length of the street. And each year, different people show up and they bring different gifts and superpowers to the table. So this year, Parker Foster, who's a documentary cinematographer, showed up and said, can I make a short film? And you should see the short film that he made. I mean, it's majestic. He didn't get paid, he just did it. So when you let loose and invite people to actually have a seat at the table, not just in name, but in reality, a guy showed up and said, could I DJ? And we were like, well, we don't have amplification rights. He said, well, I have a battery operated machine. And we were like, all right, I don't know if I love, okay, you know what, sure. And he just set up in a corner and he did tunes and it was great. And somebody else tried something. We tried getting everybody to sing Lean On Me. That didn't work so well, and that was okay too. But I think there was a real lesson in that, because since this last one that we did on October 7th, we've had inbounds from 140 different cities. And a city can be 6 or 7 different people where they call and say, we'd like to do a table like this, and we send them the toolkit, and we basically try to support them to do their own. They don't have to do it my way. They do it in whatever way works for them, because we're not dictating it. But it's been such an interesting lesson, because for 20 years, kind of like you're describing, you were trying to control things. And people say to me, it's funny because I was at Nextdoor, it would be a perfect Nextdoor activation. And my old CEO, who's now at OpenAI, she said, this would have been a great idea. Why didn't we do that? And in some ways, the freedom that came with not having to explain brand and the thousands of decks I would have had to go through to get somebody to buy into the idea, allowed for the creativity to just flow. And it sounds so crazy, but I used to say when I was in tech that we should start a support group so that we could just share our decks as we all made the pitch to spend money, because it was you were just having to explain the basics over and over again. And really, it was very, very difficult to make the economics work, because guess what? Connecting emotionally is not a spreadsheet. I mean, of course it has to deliver results. Of course we're driving business. But if you have to do a spreadsheet to explain, it's basically never gonna happen. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing. I'm 100% a believer in technology. I think technology is an enabler. I'm the crazy person who, Shaina knows. I went with her. They were doing some TikTok where they were showing off the outfits, and I stood right behind her, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try that too. I have no idea what I'm doing. But I do think you have to try things to understand as a marketer. You have to develop that muscle memory, and AI is no different. I say, because I am not at a big company, so I don't have the big machines, but I'm it's like having an intern. They get you 80% of the way there, but you still have to check it and make sure it makes sense, right? Yep. But it's pretty helpful. And if you're just gonna be one of those people who's no, it's, I'm it's coming. So I feel it's the early days of the internet where people just wished it away. I'm it's not happening.
But can I actually I find the example that you gave just fascinating, because just like the corollary to the way that brands have to activate in an authentic way. It's like, it's such a strong like lesson to take away. You know, I think often about how TikTok, being a place that has democratized access to storytelling and platforms, has created this environment where whether you have 1 follower or a billion followers, like however many followers you have an equal opportunity to be able to tell your story and get out there and like let your story resonate. What an amazing thing. Yeah, sometimes scary for brands, because if it doesn't go your way, that's scary. But what an amazing thing for brands. And this idea of like OG creator marketing, influencer marketing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, however far back you want to go, where you're like trying to access somebody's audience and their clout, that's become so much more democratic in this new environment with TikTok. And it's the equivalent of letting people come to you instead of you always going and forcing and controlling and go to them. And like, so for us, I think about often how so many of our strategies have become very hybrid. So a lot of our creator strategies and our marketing storytelling that's happening on places like TikTok, it's as much about letting people find us and then working to partner with them to help them tell their story. 100 followers, 1,000 followers, like it doesn't really matter. They're obviously good at telling a story, and many of them go on to become much more successful eventually, as it is to curate this like sort of finding people who already have that. And like it's a mix of both. You know, we work with great partners to be able to tell bigger stories with people who already have large platforms. But we've had just as much success accessing small, dedicated, passionate communities, because you're better off speaking to 10 people who care than 100,000 people who don't care, who may or may not listen to your message. Like we had this thing that happened where, like we have a lotion product, you know.
We have extras. If anyone needs.
We have a lotion product that has like a pump on it, right? And the lotion's really thick. And when you like press the pump, sometimes the lotion doesn't come up pump all the time, especially if you're using it really fast, because it's like super thick. And so people just started to complain on TikTok. And so we gathered the handful of people who were complaining, whose messages unfortunately were going like pretty wide, and we tested a prototype new cap with them. Like it wasn't ready for prime time, it's not being produced, not even approved yet. We're like, we have like 20 of these. Let's just send them to these people and see what they think. The reaction that we got was unbelievable. Like people were posting, like reaching millions of people and saying things like, I have never felt this heard before. And that's like this vulnerability that brands have to embrace. You have to be open to letting people talk to you and then talking back to them in imperfect and sometimes not ready for prime time ways. So I love the story that you took, because so much of it is relevant to in the world of like, these like paid campaigns, if we try to find those corollaries.
Can you just really quickly touch on the operations of that? Because I think like when anyone in the audience is like, how the fuck did she do that? Right? Like how quickly did you hear the community? How did you know the community was talking about it? Can you just talk about that?
Well, I think that to some, like, so it was kind of, we're always listening, always listening. You have to listen first in order to hear, right? Like you have to be looking for this stuff. And so we're always constantly listening as a team. We're not a big team. So I'm part of it. Every member of the team is listening. So you find these things and then you see a few of them sort of like get a little bit more airtime, and then we have conversations, open and judgment-free zones within the team where we talk about like, what are we going to do with this? And there's a lot of sentences that start with, what if we? What if we? Why not? Like, why not do it? What if we're working on a thing that's not ready yet, but we got a few prototypes. What if we sent it to them? What if we put it in a box? Because also these people were cutting open their bottles, by the way, with like X-Acto knives, and we sent it with a package of Band-Aids. So we're like, here's some Band-Aids, and here's a thing for you to try out because we want to hear what you think. We didn't tell them don't post it or anything. We didn't tell them to post it. We didn't tell them don't post it. We to them to get their feedback. But the feedback we got back was, of course, on a public platform. It was overwhelmingly, it was all positive, and it was also positive towards the brand for listening to them.
Can we stay on that for a second? Because I want to get Sophia's thoughts on this, because I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, obviously this is a fantastic example, Soyoung, of how EOS just kind of tapped into community to get in front of people and try to get like real-time feedback. But Sophia, for other marketers, brands that are thinking about how can we do this? Because I know TikTok sometimes is very daunting, right? And people can be intimidated about it. what are some ways that marketers could work with TikTok to identify these niche communities, these topics of conversations, and chime in a way that's authentic, that doesn't feel over curated and doesn't feel like an ad?
I think one is marketers need to shift from thinking about their audiences and from a demographic standpoint, right? So I'm Latina, over 35. I must watch Univision, right?
Right.
I never watch it, right? And there are all these other assumptions that are made about me, and the reality is that's not who I am. But if you found me in I don't know, witch talk because I'm into brujeria or something, or you found me in potato talk because I really love potato recipes, then you're really going to connect with me that way. And so what we encourage brands to do is really understand who they're talking to based on what their interests are and really find those communities where they can be a part of them authentically, right? The other thing is listen. And the reason I probed you on that was because people are always asking about how. And it's actually easier than you think, but it takes a time investment. So Soyoung and her small team are always on the platform listening. They're looking at comments. They're seeing how people are engaging. And TikTok is the most engaged community of any platform because you are not there to see what your friends are doing or what how you celebrated your grandparents' birthday. You're there to really engage about the things you love. And when a brand does something that the community doesn't like, that is going to be on TikTok. And so you better be there to hear it. I'll give an example. Friend Corey Marchesotto is the CMO of Elf Cosmetics. She had a foundation that they were discontinuing, and in the TikTok community, they were in uproar about this product not being available anymore. Corey, who's always on the pulse of it, goes through 2,000 comments a day minimum, ran down the hall to get her CEO out of his office and said, will you join me on a TikTok live right now? No comms teams, I'm looking at my comms person, no comms teams involved, no legal approval. Can you just come be a human with me and talk to this community and show them that we care and we're listening to why they're so upset we're discontinuing the product. They went on a TikTok live for 10 minutes. And again, same, the community was oh my God, the CEO cared that much that he actually took time out of his schedule to come and talk to us about this. And they felt seen and they felt heard. But again, going back to what I said, he behaved like a human, not like a brand, right? And so this is the biggest challenge. And when you hear Maryam stories and you hear, it's about behaving more like a human. And that's where we need to go in 2025 and beyond is how are we gonna break these very traditional, operational structures that we've built, and how are we going to be more flexible and more fluid and be more human as brands?
It's funny. I haven't met Brian Chesky, but I listened to an interview the other day, and he talked about how something had happened that went wrong for Airbnb, and how all his comms teams reacted. And in the end, after it was a complete disaster, and he listened, and it still didn't work, he went back and just said to the community of Airbnb hosts, "I'm really sorry." Mm-hmm. And and it was kind of the lesson he was sharing on this podcast about how that moment where he was just human and trusted his own instincts and said, I'm not going to worry about all the legal things. I'm just going to say whatever, we made a bad decision and I'm sorry, and how the narrative changed, right? And I think it's hard. Look, it's really hard. You sit in these seats and there's so many opinions when there's a crisis that show up at the table, from your internal comms team to your external comms team to everybody to tell you. But if you have a small, nimble team that can move and obviously listen, but also just remember, in the end, everybody's just human. And by the way, we all make mistakes, and it's okay to own up to them. Obviously, I know the lawyers would say within reason. But that's really what struck me, right? Was this lesson that he'd had of just trusting himself and just saying, you know what, okay, we made a mistake and I'm sorry. And I find that it's like Brene Brown, right? It's those are easy words to say. I actually am sorry, or I'm gonna listen. I think it's so interesting, we're having this conversation, listening is such a remarkable, revolutionary act. But guess what, people, any of us, we all wanna be seen and heard. It's such a basic human instinct. It's the more we go forward, the more basic it becomes.
Was this issued in a press release, or was it a video?
No, I think initially they did a press release. They were managing how he was going to do it, and then I think he went for a more authentic way. I don't think he went on TikTok. There's still time. But I do think that at that point you would have to do a video. I think doing it in a letter just seems, crazy. On the flip side, we were having this moment when Luigi, when that whole thing happened with United, right? You all saw that Burger King tweet that said, when he got caught in McDonald's, they said, well, if he'd come to Burger King, we wouldn't have knocked on him. It was like a really fast, you guys remember that? I mean, it was funny, but you could argue in poor taste. But you could imagine how many layers they would have had to go through to be like, oh my God, you can't send that out, right? And then the CEO sent out a letter the next day sort of defending the guy who was shot. And we can all agree it's terrible to have somebody be shot. But his letter just felt so disconnected. I felt like a robot had written that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just think like there is this element of like just understanding what's happening and being human that it's easy for me to say, but very difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring Shaina in on this because I think what we're talking about here is very interesting. Sometimes being tapped into culture is being irreverent. It's using the comments. It's, making a kind of impromptu video. So, Shaina, from your perspective, I know that UTA helps a lot of brands with this. And so I'm just curious, what are some of the conversations that you're noticing on these social platforms, especially from Gen Z, about the kinds of things that they want to see from brands? Do they want to see this from brands at all?
It's obviously a heavy moment, I think, for a lot of us in this new year, given things like the fires in LA and new administration. And I've thought a lot about what brand consistency looks like. And in a lot of the stories that everyone is sharing, what I think is really powerful is that, we expect sometimes to consumers to know what our why is, but brands can't say what it is in like one sentence to themselves, right? They don't know what they stand for and what they value. And I think if more brands did that exercise of saying what are the things that you want to show up for, there's a lot more clarity in terms of when we speak, why we speak, and how we speak. And there's a really fine difference between when it comes to Gen Z culture and meme culture, dark humor, how we think about trends and viral moments, about cultural appreciation and appropriation, right? When we talk about Gen Z language, a lot of that is appropriated from queer and Black communities and African American vernacular English, or when we think about how we're reacting to pop culture in real time, there's a level of brand risk, but I think brands forget that within 24 hours, the news cycle shifts over, right? So there's a new headline, Gen Z has a less than 8-second attention span, and what we say about that is that it doesn't mean Gen Z can only focus for 8 seconds. Like I oftentimes get the notification on TikTok from the person that's like, you've been scrolling for a while. Do you want to go to sleep? And then I quickly just skip it. I just keep looking at my feed. But all of it to say that like Gen Z does have the capacity to focus on things, whether they're short form or long form content, but it's a matter of how brands pull us in. And I think a lot of the popularization of like going away from linear TV and ads has been what are the things that are really integrated into your feed versus those things that are interruptive to your feed. So when it feels like what you're watching can be something that is actually like a friend or a account that you follow or something on your For You page that looks exactly like something else in your feed, it's seamless. And sometimes you're like, wait, I want to know what happens at the end of this ad. Like, I didn't even realize it was an ad to begin with. And I think that's what we encourage a lot of our brands to think about is we're here to talk about entertainment and culture collectively. So if we're doing something that's a product placement engagement with Wicked or The Bear and having brands show up in that story, we only want to put forward brands that make sense for what's organically happening, rather than trying to reverse engineering or add the word lit or pop off in an ad, right? We're actually getting to do things that are really symbiotic to it. And I want to touch on what Sophia said as well, that when we think about the democratization of TikTok, what's most exciting to me is like going to the comments section. Like I think it's like this brand revolution where like people feel so seen when they have like 600 followers, but like a brand is commenting and being like, you did a really good job. Or if you see a brand if you see a person, whether they have 10 followers like Soyoung said or 1 million, talk about a brand, like send them the product, right? Like why can't loyalty be every time you talk about a product, you get a point in your account because you organically posted being at a specific restaurant or with a specific brand. We haven't really thought about these traditional systems of loyalty, of consumeristic practice and how they actually relate to consumers. And I think part of what brands like TikTok or even in our work with EOS has been so exciting is that people understand that if you actually want to change consumer behavior, part of it is your production and your operations line, but part of it is also mindset, right? That like risk is not something that we necessarily have to shift away from, but also like the right consumer is always right is something that I learned when I was in college, and it was like a consumer psychology professor that said that, people tell you that the customer is always right. That's not true. It's like the right customer that understands who you are and what you are and that actually matters to you. That's the consumer that's always right for you. And I think brands should do more of that exercise of like, what do we stand for? What's our why? What is our value? And like, come back and for yourself say, this is what we stand for in one sentence. This is what it means for our employees, and then this is what it means for our consumers as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think what she just said is just so important. I have to say, I'm going to tell you guys an anecdote from my perspective. I'm obviously an ad age reporter. I cover a lot of campaigns that are, constantly coming in my inbox, and I see all kinds of things, right? I have to say there's a lot of flip-flopping happening right now, as we all know. And I think it comes to no one's surprise that a lot of that has to do with diversity and inclusion. We are familiar with what's going on in this administration. It is January 30th, and I don't think I've received the first Black History Month pitch. Just remember that. And so I think, what Shaina is saying is super important about just asking yourself your why, understanding who you are as a brand, and sticking to that, right? Because, what we're talking about here is that if you don't stick to that, the performatism is going to show. And so I wanted to toss it back to Soyoung, because I'm curious from the EO's perspective. Obviously, you work with Shaina's team, you're constantly collaborating. How do you identify the things that you can do that are authentic and don't feel performative? Because you run that risk, right, of being called out by the community and being told that you're flip-flopping or being fake.
I think, part of what's wonderful about partnering with Shaina's team is that they help us to see some of those things from an outside perspective. So I had an old boss who used to say that perspective is worth 60 IQ points. It's basically like getting that fresh perspective makes you that much smarter. And part of getting fresh perspective is getting outside perspective, because sometimes we're a little too navel-gazy as like an industry. And so, there are times, I'll use an example, for example, with our lotion product that I was talking about. One of the things that we learned over time by reading the comments was that people really felt like our lotion made them appeal to their romantic partner. I'm saying this in like very like safe terms. I'm about to like say other stuff. So we basically had a whole idea for partnering with creators to talk about this, to basically like say, like tell us like how, I don't even remember what the hashtag was or whatever it was like. No, yeah, it was a different one. But it was basically like people talking about how wearing our product made them like irresistible to their partner. But like one of the pieces of content that we got back was, I think it was like a minute and a half long, which, that is not typical like paid media fodder, right? Like a minute and a half long. And she doesn't even talk about or mention or show our product until about halfway through the minute and a half. And we're like, I don't know that this is gonna work for us. And they were like, trust us. It's so engaging. Anyone who's watching this, even if it says like sponsored at the bottom, is going to keep watching this whole thing. And then there is such a fluid, seamless transition to talk about how our product, she was basically talking about like meeting her boyfriend and like the first time they hooked up and then she's like, and then of course I used my EOS lotion, and then like she pulls it out like halfway through. And so having partners who can like really keep you on the forefront of understanding how audiences are going to consume your content so that you have a chance at cutting through in this massive sea of sameness and clutter and just like over inundation in marketing messaging is just incredibly critical. And so I think, that's just a big shout out to our partnership.
The strangest memory just came to me as you described that, and I'm not going to be talking about what you're talking about, a million years ago, I was a CMO at Univision, so it's coming back. And I'm not Hispanic, so that makes a lot of sense. But we called it the first ever user-generated upfront. This was before social was really a thing. We actually went out to the Univision community and we ran ads on the network and said, please tell us why you love Univision. There was sort of this incredible relationship between the viewers of Univision and the network. And I'd worked at NBC, I'd worked at other media companies. It was a different relationship. People would call Univision if they had a problem. It was almost like a member of the family because there was advocacy, right? So we knew that there was this like really incredible relationship between them, and which was unusual for the English language space. And in media, you would sell to English language buyers, right? So you would sell to people who weren't consumers of your product, which is a very complicated thing, right? So media buyers who didn't consume your product would be the ones making the decision, and they had no emotional relationship to the brand. So they would go to NBC, they'd see, Ross or Chandler, I'm dating myself, Friends, and they'd be like, oh my God. But they'd see Don Francisco and they'd be like, whatever, right? It was just a number, even though he was by far the most popular variety show on TV. Anyway, we had no idea if this was going to work, and we just basically said we were going to try to explain to our buyers why they loved Univision. And we went out and put this out. We had 2 weeks, and honestly, it was the craziest thing, because if it didn't work, I was totally going to get fired. But we got literally in 3 days, we started getting these videos back, and I kid you not, the first one came in, and a guy had gotten on horseback, and he was going around and talking about how Univision was like the sun. And I was like, holy shit, we've hit gold. And I never really put it together until this moment. And we must have gotten 50 or 60 of these user-generated videos that people just this was not TikTok. And I have to tell you, one of the things that I found magical about TikTok is how easy you made it for people to create content. I was working at Nextdoor, so I was in a social platform. And I remember the first time, I was like, holy shit, the product was really good. And so you can't minimize that, right? But these people just made it on their own, and then they sent it in. It was crazy. But it's kind of the same thing. If you find the people who love your product, I don't mean just passively, there is this incredible tug. And we actually invited them all to come to the upfront and be on stage. And so when Don Francisco came out, they totally lost their mind. And so the audience could experience it through them, because we had no way to translate it. But it's such an interesting thing, because I really hadn't thought about that. And it was analog. Right? And you guys have made it so much easier. It's such a golden opportunity if you can lean into it. But it does require trust, I say trust and grace, right? And being willing to sort of let go of control.
Yeah, I want to bring you in, Sophia, because we're talking a little bit about user-generated content. And there's obviously a lot of organic content that comes out of TikTok, right? It's very easy for consumers to chime into brands or trends, or even if they don't like something. But I'm curious how brands could use these conversations that are already happening organically to take it to the next level, right? We've seen people make friends on TikTok and turn it into in-person gatherings. So what are some examples, from your experience of brands that have done that or can do that if you see an opportunity to kind of chime into these niche communities?
I think it's a lot simpler than probably everyone expects me to share, but it really is about listening. And someone said that earlier, you just have to listen to what people are asking for. You have to listen to what pains them, listen to what excites them, but you have to be there listening. And as marketers, we're really great at being students of culture. We hire agencies, we go to Kantar and get the consumer research, but we're not very good at being participants in culture. We kind of we hire it out, right? And to be a participant in culture, you have to be on the platform. And I cannot tell you how many CMOs I know that are actually not on the platform. And when I ask them about TikTok, they're like, oh yeah, I know TikTok because my 16-year-old's on it. You don't know TikTok then, right? And so we have to challenge ourselves to actually immerse ourselves in the spaces that we want to talk to our communities in. And that's hard. And it actually takes commitment and work. But your example even, the Univision example and your example about listening and the example I gave, and I'll give you an example from a brand standpoint. A week ago, there was a lot of, TikTok, we miss you. And there was a Joe and the Juice said I really miss posting on the platform right now. And we responded with we really miss you too. And Joe and the Juice then made a video for us. They responded through video, and we were like, holy shit, they responded. We were so excited. It goes both ways. When you see the community really responding to your brand, people are behind brands, right? Seth Mathlan's asked me one time, what kills brands? And I said, marketers. And he was like, whoa, I did not expect you to say that. And I'm like, because we don't do the things that we're all talking about on this stage. And there are people behind the brands. And so how are we continuously challenging ourselves to do the work of being in the culture with the community versus just hiring it out to agencies, partners, et cetera?
I have another example of how it can also go for a couple of things that came out of both of those comments. But so we also had we had a recent launch that was supposed to be in the next week, but it ended up going a little early because people got really excited and like retailers got excited and they ended up on shelves sooner than we thought. It's like, what do you do as a marketer when you don't have a launch plan for stuff that shows up on shelf and somebody starts seeing it on TikTok and people start getting annoyed because it's at like some regional small grocery store in like remote Texas, right? Like, and people are like, why is this not in my state? And what's wrong with the EOS market? Literally, they're like, what is wrong with the EOS marketing team? You haven't said anything about this product. And then one of the people who we're friendly with, who again, she came out of this like community, not because she's a massive influencer, but she has like 100,000 followers. That's pretty good, but that's, you know, in TikTok, it's
That's not a massive influence.
It's not a massive following, but she's very specifically in a dedicated fragrance talk community. And she, in one comment on one video where people were pissed off, wrote, not me jumping on a plane to Texas. And we're like, that happened. We're gonna fly her to Texas and fly a bunch of other people to Texas. And within 1 week, we had organized an influencer trip to Pearland, Texas, to a grocery store, and filmed content at a grocery store. And some of these people had been friends with each other in the fragrance talk community forever and had never met in real life. And so then they filmed content together and people were going nuts in the comments because they're like, oh my God, you two are together? Like, what is going on? So it's like we turned lemons into lemonade, but it really required us to be deep in the comments. And then the piece that was really fun was to kind of turn it into an IRL experience.
Maryam, I think you can probably share some really interesting anecdotes too, because you've obviously done these in real life experiences, and I'm sure that a lot of interesting commentary comes out of these forums, things that you could learn, right, as a marketer about what people are interested in. I am curious, have you ever had the experience of getting real-time feedback from, people who attend events like The Longest Table?
If you invite 1,000 neighbors, there's a lot of people with opinions. And like I said, you learn trust and grace. You learn to say, yeah, I'm by the way, guess what? There's a million things I can do better. And sometimes people give you feedback. You always have to listen. You don't always have to accept it because you may not actually be able to act on it. But I think the other thing that's super interesting is, so we did this table for 3 years. People started replicating in other places, as I mentioned to you. And what was interesting to me is, somebody did it in a church parking lot in Kansas City. Somebody did it in a community college. And where was that place where they said they were eating the cats and dogs? I mean, it was crazy. I was like, I'm going to go to that Longest Table. Springfield. And then somebody did one in Oklahoma City where it was in the home of the first black doctor in Oklahoma City when it was like Black Wall Street. They turned it into a foundation, and so that woman did one. And so I stay in touch with them, and I learn something from all of them. And what I really learn is that I don't have to have control. The other day I was on the phone with somebody who was saying to me, well, you need to trademark this and you need to, really maintain the brand. And the thing that's kind of interesting about this is I don't really do that. I mean, I give them a toolkit with the logo and they can use it, but really the magic is that they do it in whatever way they want. And so that actually gives them a lot of ownership, right? And I learn from that. I think the other really interesting thing that I learned from the table, which I got to apply in a corporate setting, last year I ran Brainstorm Tech for Fortune and the Most Powerful Women Conference. And so Most Powerful Women, I'd gone for 11 years as a CMO. It's a, I've loved that community. I went, obviously, for a long time, but it can feel uptight. And, you can walk into a conference of really, vetted women. You have to be invited and then pay a lot of money to go. And I say, like, high school never ends because you walk in and there's always that mean girl feeling of like, I don't know anybody. And if you're a powerful woman, guess what? You have a lot of emails, so you can be like, I'm just going to go to my room and do emails instead, right? It happens, and I've seen it, right, as somebody who'd gone. So one of my goals was to make sure that this year when we did MPW, that it was going to be a much more inclusive environment. You come, you spend all this money, you've been vetted, and I want you to come in and really build relationships. One of the things we did at the Longest Table that I learned was we had something we call table captains. Shaina was a table captain. So if you found nodes of people who were organizers who you knew, you would say to them, Shaina, okay, you're going to come. How many people do you want to bring? And this year, I think she was about 30. So she then was responsible for her 30 people and how they were going to handle food. So she comes half an hour early, she coordinates her team, and they figure out their food. Somebody coordinates 8 people, somebody coordinates 10, some people come as ones, and some people come as twos, right? So Shaina comes, she's sort of a semi-party within this bigger party. So that's great. But the ones and twos come, and there's that awkward moment where you show up and people are sitting and you don't know where you're supposed to go. So we had hosts. And the job of the host was to take you and walk you down and say, Shaina, can you make room for Sophia? She doesn't know anybody. So we really mindfully hosted people and made sure that they got integrated into the table. So fast forward to MPW, I said, when I got to running the thing, I said, we're gonna seat everybody on the first night of the conference. That's 350 people, it's like a wedding. And the head of production was like, that's a really bad idea. And so this goes on, now we're in a big group setting, she says it again, and I said, well, we're gonna try to seat everybody like a wedding. And we're gonna have a host at each table to make sure that the team talks. Like you're at a rubber chicken dinner, like it's just so boring, you talk to the person at your right, your left, and then you get up, and what did you get from that? And so she said, I just wanna say, I think that's a really bad idea. Now this is in front of the whole team. It's a really bad idea, and the reason I'm saying that is because I'm thinking about the success of the event. And I said, you know what, we share the same goal. I also am concerned about the success of the event, and I will take that under consideration, but guess what, we're gonna seat people. So we sat people. And then we actually anointed mini hosts. So I went into the community, I self-selected 20 people who were like our super users. And so they didn't get a discount, they were just badged. It was like, you're gonna be our ambassadors, and your job is to come and make sure that you make sure people get introduced. So it was like lessons taken from this other totally different experience. It transformed the experience of MPW this year. And one of my favorite things was powerful women love a job. So we're at the conference with 350 people, and all of a sudden one of them's like, I gotta go because I'm hosting a table. I was like, this is genius. I mean, they took the job super seriously. And I had people coming up to being like, those women, they say I should be an ambassador next year. I was like, what is happening? So, I mean, there's these lessons that you learn, and then you can apply them in so many different ways. And so I think one of the things I say to people all the time is like, if there's something you're passionate about, you should just go do it. And some of that learning will come into the day job too, right? It's not like I had some grand plan, but all of these things intertwine. And now I'm so much more attuned to these micro communities, right? There's so many of these that have formed in the last 3 years. I mean, you all know about the epidemic of loneliness and division and the mental health thing. There are so many people organizing micro communities like I've never seen before. Gaia Collective gets people together to sing together who've never met before. I mean, if you haven't seen that, you should check that out. They also do a Wicked one. So if you like Wicked, you can go sing Wicked with them. There's reading pains. They gather in bars and different places. Literally, they gather on the red steps of Times Square to just read together. Strangers reading together. I mean, there's so many of these micro communities. And what's also happening is all these tech companies are coming to now aggregate those. And so that'll be a whole nother thing that's coming. And they're going to pay those organizers for those communities. It's like a reverse of Meetup. So there's so many interesting things coming, but in the end, guess what? Everybody still wants in real life community. I mean, technology enables you to do it faster or better or find your friend when you're in San Francisco. That happens. You're like, wait, you're in San Francisco? I'm in San Francisco. You wouldn't get that otherwise, but it's just a tool in the end.
As a testimonial of 2 times being a table captain at Longest Table, I adore my mom. I'm very close to her, like a proud first-gen daughter of immigrants, and like my mom does not leave the house. And the only time she's left the house for anything is when I host the Longest Table, because she'll always make biryani, and she'll come and she'll sit with my friends and talk to them. My brother's 8, he's Gen Alpha. I can barely keep up with what Gen Alpha is doing, but he'll come with my mom to Longest Table. And I share that anecdote to say that I think, like, if I had like a magic wand that brands could like understand what to do better or like how to create affinity, would be like, if a brand is the reason you met your best friend, like people will never forget yapping about that brand. Yeah. Like if EOS is the reason I get to meet someone that I've never met before, and like as a proud One Direction stan, when I was 14, I had a fan page, and I like made memes. Some of them went viral before viral was a thing. I was in a community with these other, young teenage girls, and like we would all talk on Twitter and talk online. But the goal was always that we wanted to meet up in person, right? Like that we wanted to be able to touch, to feel, to hug. And what Maryam's we've talked a lot about this, that people are craving being in person much more, particularly after COVID. But I think it's such a white space for brands not to lean into that more. Like, we talk a lot about this idea of being digital. How does the digital experience translate into the physical world? And there's so many storefronts and spaces in New York that are underutilized. It's really hard to get access to venues. It's really costly. But if you're someone who has like a supper club or a reading club of 10 people, like, if more brands could facilitate that kind of organic interaction, it'd be so powerful. And it feels like those things are often gate-kept, right? That you don't know what's happening and where it's happening. But to me, like, Gen Z is so bad at actually leaving plans in the group chat. Like, there's a whole trend on TikTok that talks about this, that like, my friends want to go to Miami and we'll talk a lot about it. We never go to Miami. But if a brand could help facilitate that and make that happen, I think it'd be so powerful. And I think something that so many people are craving and needing, but we don't always get to see that kind of bespoke marketing of sorts, or even community support from brands. But it's such a missed opportunity, because I know a lot of people are certainly looking for that, and a lot of those folks have that niche micro community that's really become mainstream nowadays, but don't always have the support or the platform to be able to do everything they want.
Yeah. So time is flying by, you guys, and I do want to open it up for questions. But before we do that, I do want to pivot for a second, because we've been talking a lot about in-person connection, and I think the theme here is pretty clear, right? So, I think we all know that we need to facilitate more in-person connections, but one of the things that we open this conversation with is AI in the age of creativity and in the age of, brands reaching community. And so I'm curious, as we talk about connecting and community and trying to be, on the pulse of culture, can we all go from Shaina to me and say maybe one or two things that brands can do to also maybe incorporate AI to help facilitate these things? How can we now integrate technology to facilitate the in-person connection as well?
I would say before we think about mainstream and major adoption of AI, I'm someone that believes in critiquing things, particularly through a social justice lens. So I think I'm very mindful of who are the arbiters of these tools? Like, who was this tool created for, and what communities does it serve, particularly for Black and Brown and marginalized communities? So my quick note would be that a lot of trends that you get to see are created by diverse young people that are then adopted by other brands. So when we are thinking about the AI tools we lean into, understanding the biases, the communities, the data, the historical evidence that's then going to enable the campaigns and ideas that might be facilitated from them is certainly something that I'm hyper aware of. And I hope that any brand or any agency that does use those tools is acknowledging the fact of the deficiencies as well as the I was like, a fire alarm? I was like, they agree with me? But as well as the things that are incredibly beneficial of platforms like these as well.
I feel like my response is just kind of coming full circle to my the first thing that I said, which is that I think that AI for us and for me and for the foreseeable future is a way for me to free up bandwidth to focus on the things that really matter.
So plus 1,000 to what you said, plus 1,000 to what you said. I guess I'll just add that AI is being talked about right now as like a big, scary thing. And the reality is it is hitting us faster than anyone can possibly imagine. We're moving into significant agentive AI, and I think we're going to blink and see it. So someone said earlier, we need to be more experimental as marketers, and that would be my advice to marketers, is just like get in there and try it. Try it yourself. Not necessarily have your brand try it immediately, but like, again, as being, practitioners and not just students, like get in there, try all the products, build your own avatar, see what that's like, because then you're gonna have a better judgment as to whether it's right for your brand or not.
The people who give me the best tips about like tools to use are people who are freelancers, because they actually don't have any option but to try to find ways to be more efficient. So a guy who was doing a podcast told me about a tool, its name is going to blank me, but literally I can put a YouTube clip into it and it'll give me a 30-second clip, 8 of them, it'll grade them, it'll tell me, if it's got an A hook, a B. I mean, I did that and I was like, oh my God, right? There's so many of those tools. It's not just otter and record your meeting. But I think the thing that's super interesting, like I mentioned to you, I ran Brainstorm AI, and the journalists write a lot about AI, right? Because guess what? That's a hot topic. And I remember we were sitting in a room where it was a breakout, and they were taking notes, and then they were exchanging, I'm on the Slack channel where they're saying, like, can somebody send me the transcript or the video? And I was like, why aren't you using Otter to record it so that it can be, I mean, you can use the tool you write about, right? I mean, I think it's like an extra step, right? Because you're so used to doing the thing that you know. And so if you have friends who are freelancers, I can guarantee you that they're actually on it sooner because they have no choice. And so just use it and don't be afraid. I mean, I'm the first one to say I don't know anything. When I first joined Nextdoor, like I took the job in 3 weeks and it was COVID. And I'd never used Slack before, so I was new to Slack, but I didn't have a way to reach people, right? And we didn't have a phone list, we were in an office. And I remember I had to get a hold of the CTO and I saw there was a phone button and I just clicked on it. And he said to me, you're the first person who's ever phoned me on Slack. I was like, I don't know, there was a button, I pushed it. And I think if you adopt that mindset, it's like, well, okay, I mean, it could not work, but right, if you have that mindset, like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, it doesn't work, like, okay. And because there's no question that it's coming.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to chime into my own question because I have an interesting vantage point of the industry, and I think, you know, I'm both a consumer and a reporter covering the industry, and it's important to remember that AI is just a tool, it's not the destination. And I see a lot of AI being used for the sake of using AI, but it's important to realize that these things can actually help make community better, right? I mean, I use AI in my job every day to make social media videos about a cool activation that I just went to, you know, and caption it so that it's inclusive for the people that, you know, can't hear the video. I use AI to transcribe meetings where I have these interesting discussions and send the transcript to people if they want to review it. I use AI to summarize these meetings and maybe like send key takeaways or maybe even draft an agenda before the conversation so that it can be a little bit of an icebreaker and, you know, people are not as uncomfortable. So I think it's important to remember that, like, you know, if you use it in a way that is helping your end goal, it's more effective and efficient than if you make it the end goal to use it. So that's my takeaway on AI. And I also just want to say, you know, all of this that we're talking about here is covered in Ad Age in an article called Creative Trends of 2025, Chaos and More. And so we had 62 creatives that we talked to chime in on this conversation. Among some of the trends, we talked about community, in-person connection, and we also talked a lot about AI, irreverence, brands being a little bit more fun, letting loose, because that's important. And so all of this is on adage.com. Can we give a round of applause for these wonderful ladies?